What a great night of fights. I'm going to review every fight starting from the ground up with Piero Rodriguez all the way up to Kevin Vallejos. I'm not going to go too in depth about every fight because most of the prelims they went exactly the way I predicted. Piero Rodriguez, she dominated her matchup. Hector Sosa, he had a good fight. Bia Mosquito, her fight was a complete mismatch. And Eric Anders, he was having the bigger moments. Manuel Souza with another badass performance. That was a really fun fight. And for it to end with a monstrous knockout like that, that was sick. And then Elijah Smith dropping a massive load on Su Young Yu's face. That was really cool too. Then Vitor Petroni landing the heavier shots. I knew he wouldn't completely gas out, landing some damage without landing some damage. If he was gonna gas out, he was gonna damage up Steven Asplund, and that damage slowed down Asplund. Also Vitor has only gassed really badly in one fight. And everyone thought that's how he's gonna look every fight now. And he didn't look great in round three in this fight, but he had enough in the tank to win, and it was a decent performance. He's a decent fighter, but I don't think he's a future champion, And next, the Orbai fight, that was just domination. I know that's someone who's got some serious gas tank, I mean, I felt like we would see Orbai dominate, but that was just insane to witness, And he was on Kurtis like white on rice. He just would not let him go, and I don't even think Orbai was stalling. He was kind of just marabbing him. It was just takedown after takedown. Like the ref was just kind of dragging it when he was saying he needs to work to improve or whatever he was yelling, keep working. Because Orbai would just keep taking him down anytime Kurtis got up, And then, that Bruno Silva fight, I don't know. I have to watch it back, but I thought it was closer than a 30-27 scorecard for Johnson. I don't know what everyone else thought. I thought if they think it was a robbery or not, but I just thought Bruno won that fight. The first round it was close. I have to watch it back, but I thought he did enough in the second and third round. I saw Bruno as a minus 5,000 favorite during the last minute of a fight. I literally looked at the odds and saw him as a minus 5,000 favorite. No exaggeration. In the last minute of the fight, and then some judge gave Johnson a 30-27 scorecard. That was just crazy to hear. And then most fights, they went the way I expected them to go, except the Umar C fight. That one really surprised me. It looked like there was a new version of Iwon Kutalaba, and at the same time, Omar C, isn't as good as he looks. He's still super afraid to step forward and fight, and for him to just tap so quickly was pretty shocking. You see guys like Arman Sarukian and Alexander Volkanovski in the same choke position, and they're turning blue and purple, and they're still fighting to get out of the choke. So that really surprised me, and it told a lot about Umar C's character. It looked like he just didn't want to be in there. Anyways, that Marwan Rahiki fight, that was a fun fight. He's a fun fighter, but if he goes up against someone with clean, powerful counters, he's completely cooked. Because Marwan is all gas, no breaks. Coming forward, so someone with good head movement can really just slip and catch him. But he's a fun fighter, and he got the win. And the Delgado fight, I don't think Delgado had a bad performance as a massive favorite. I just think Fili had a phenomenal performance, because Delgado was looking calculated for the most part. It was just, Fili was just looking so sharp, especially in that first round. I mean, that nasty counter right hand by Fili in the first round, then Delgado adjusted. But still, it was super close fight, and I thought it would be close. That's why I didn't add Delgado to any parlays. But I thought the decision could have gone either way. It was just a really close fight, right? And then the Jillian Robertson fight, I didn't really pay too much attention, if I'm being honest. So I don't know. I guess she won. And the Vallejos fight, absolute masterclass. Vallejos is the future. That was a phenomenal performance, But yeah, a lot of fun fights tonight. All the confident picks came through. Elijah Smith, Miktebek Orbai, and Bia Mosquito. All three of those confident picks, they came through. And the top four parlays I gave out in my last video came through, which are the most important ones, So obviously I'm happy about that. It was a great week. I didn't put the parlays on this slide because I was kind of lazy. But the lock of the week, Kevin Vallejos, came through. So it was a great night. Let's continue on with these picks. So welcome to this week's prediction episode for Lerone Murphy versus Movsar Evloev, where I'll be discussing, breaking down, and predicting every fight on the card, starting with Melissa Mullins versus Luana Carolina. So my pick for this fight is Luana Carolina. I think Luana is definitely going to be the better striker, and will land the better shots, and will also be able to keep this fight on the feet. I don't think Mullins can get her takedowns because she usually takes her opponents down by either setting up her takedowns with strikes or capitalizing when opponents pressure forward. Luana Carolina is not going to pressure forward recklessly. She'll manage distance. So if Mullins has to strike with her to set up her takedowns, Mullins is going to lose the striking battle, and won't be able to set up her takedowns. Melissa Mullins, she is primarily a wrestler, looking to get this fight on the ground and gather up control time and pretty much look for ground and pound. She doesn't have a single submission win in her career. Luana Carolina is primarily a kickboxer, keeping this fight at range, landing from the outside, and if opponents close the distance on her, she's throwing knees and elbows in the clinch, and she just tries to keep the fight on the feet where she usually holds an advantage. So this is pretty much a striker versus wrestler matchup, and I'm not a fan of Melissa Mullins' striking. I think she looks very much like an amateur in the striking realm. If she gets a takedown, she can look dominant. But if she can't get a takedown and she's forced to strike, it's just a bad sight to see for her. So when it's on the feet, Luana Carolina is clearly going to be the better fighter. She's hitting and moving, circling around the cage, switching stances, keeping at range, mixing in her leg kicks with the head kicks. And Melissa Mullins usually has to strike a bit to close the distance and set up her takedowns. So it's easy for Mullins to get takedowns when her opponents are just rushing forward into her, and all she has to do is get a body lock and trip them. But with Luana Carolina isn't going to come forward brawling. She's going to manage her distance, make Mullins chase her a bit, strike with Mullins, and exit out the pocket. And if Mullins does manage to close the distance, she's gonna get hit, with knees and elbows in the clinch. So that's how I see this fight going. Mullins having a strike in order to set up her takedowns because Luana isn't gonna rush her, and Mullins pretty much is going to be getting outstruck, trying to close the distance, which won't allow her to set up any takedowns. And even if Mullins gets her up against the fence, I like Luana's clinch game. Because as of now, everything we've seen, Mullins is primarily a wrestler. She wants to clinch in order to set up her takedowns and get her top control. But during the striking, she's looking really stiff when she's forced to stand and strike. And Carolina, rangy kickboxer, good distance management, knees and elbows in the clinch. She prefers the long striking battle. So I'm going to say that Luana Carolina keeps this fight at range, stuffs most of the entries, and outstrikes Mullins while denying the wrestling from Mullins, right? So moving on to Shanelle Dyer versus Ravena Oliveira. My pick for this fight will be Shanelle Dyer to win. Both these ladies are unproven. Both of them usually want to strike, and both of them have a hard time getting the fights to the ground. So in a stand-up battle, I think Shanelle Dyer is the more sharper striker, which is saying a lot because Shanelle Dyer, she did just lose her Contender Series fight. I'm actually not sure why she's in the UFC, but she lost to a decent fighter. She lost pretty badly. She got dropped like 3 times in that fight, managed to survive and continue striking and attempting takedowns, but she couldn't land any takedowns. She went 0 for 11 on takedowns. But to be fair, her opponent seemed like a good fighter, and Shanelle showed a ton of heart in that fight. And now Shanelle is fighting Ravena Oliveira, and Ravena, she's 0-2 in the UFC, and before her UFC career, Ravena was beating cans. So I think it's safe to assume Ravena is not UFC level. But to be fair, her 2 losses in the UFC are to decent fighters, but we're still yet to see her beat a decent fighter or, give a decent fighter some trouble, right? Ravena pretty much has the same style as Shanelle Dyer. She's a striker, and she will go for takedowns when the striking isn't going her way. And the striking usually doesn't go her way. Sometimes she just looks like a punching bag. So she does go for takedowns when she's getting hit, but even then, her ability to get the fight on the ground is not good. So these women are pretty much the same. They've been getting outstruck and have been failing to get the fight on the ground when they're in trouble on the feet. So I'm favoring Shanelle Dyer in this matchup because her resume looks a lot better. Obviously beating girls on the regional scene isn't anything impressive, but at least they have decent records. Ravena's only victories have come by beating 0-4 level types of fighters, and on top of that, Dyer seems to be the more powerful striker. She has a head kick knockout in her resume and also a spinning back fist knockout victory as well. That seems like she's the more dangerous fighter compared to Ravena, who has mostly TKO victories. So I see Shanelle Dyer being the cleaner, sharper striker here. She'll manage distance and strike with more accuracy and power against Ravena Oliveira, who's more of a chaotic, brawling type of fighter, you know. And both of their wrestling games have not shown to be good. So I imagine none of them will be able to get this fight on the ground. So if that's the case, I'm gonna side with Dyer, who's more sharper and more dangerous striker. You know, with real finishing tools like her head kick, her spinning back fist, and she's more durable and she's aggressive. You know, Oliveira, she's more of that chaotic striker and she's hittable as well. And her wrestling attempts, they usually fail when the striking goes poorly. So I'm picking Shanelle Dyer to have the cleaner striking here, being the more dangerous fighter and having the finishing upside as well in a stand-up fight. Moving on to Shaqueme Rock versus Abdul Kareem Al-Selwady. Shaquille O'Neal is back, but I'm picking Al-Selwady to win this fight. I think Shamrock's path to victory here lies in controlling the grappling exchanges and getting submission, but I don't think he's strong enough to control or bully someone as strong as Al-Selwady, you know, who's built like a little tank. So I think Al-Selwady is going to land the harder punches on the feet and be strong enough to not get bullied in the clinch by Shamrock. You know, he just got dominated by Nurulo Aliev, and of course I predicted that to happen. You know, Nurulo was a confident pick of mine in that fight, but I didn't expect Nurulo to completely dominate the striking exchanges. You know, that caught me off guard. There were times where Shamrock looked like he was just a punching bag in that fight. He couldn't do anything at all in the striking, and also got taken down pretty easily. But Nurulo, you know, he's a beast, so I guess that's okay. But even then, Shamrock hasn't looked to be impressive at all. You know, before his fight with Nurulo, he went to a split decision with a fighter that has a 16-11 record, you know, and before that fight, he beat someone with a 16-12 record, you know. And the thing about Shamrock is he's usually beating guys by catching them in a submission. Out of his 11 wins, 8 of them are by submission. Now he's fighting Al-Selwady, and Al-Selwady has never been submitted ever in his career. You know, Al-Selwady, he is 0-1 in the UFC. He made his UFC debut 2 years ago and hasn't fought since. And he, like I said, you know, he lost his debut, but he fought someone with good power and good wrestling, you know. I think in this matchup with Shamrock, Al-Selwady will be the one with more power in the striking and will be stronger physically in the clinch exchanges. You know, Shamrock will be about 5 inches taller here, but he's tall and skinny, whereas Al-Selwady is shorter and muscular and has a massive back on him. And I think it'll be hard for Shamrock to just bully him around in the clinch. You know, I think Al-Selwady can dictate the clinch exchanges. And in the striking, I see Al-Selwady throwing the harder shots. He has a thudding leg kicks. He has thudding leg kicks, and he moves around the cage pretty nicely. He has powerful overhands over the top to reach someone tall like Shamrock. And Al-Selwady won't get severely punished by anything Shamrock decides to throw at him. You know, Al-Selwady just seems like the stronger individual. And overall, you know, with more willpower to win, Shamrock, you know, he looked a bit defeated. You know, when he's faced with adversity, it's like he's easy to give up on himself when adversity hits and things get tough. You know, it kind of reminds me of someone like Cody Brundage, you know, who just starts shelling up when things aren't going his way. So I basically think Al-Selwady is going to be the stronger guy here, you know. In there, he'll be stronger physically and mentally. He'll control the clinch exchanges, being the stronger guy. He'll have more power in his shots with leg kicks and overhands. You know, he'll move around the cage, and he's never been submitted before in his careers. And that's how I see Shamrock having a chance to win here, you know, by catching him with a submission. But Al-Selwady I think he's high enough level to defend those submission attempts if they do come his way, you know, because Shamrock, like I said, he's a submission-heavy grappler. He's tall and lanky, relies on catching necks or scrambling. Where Al-Selwady, you know, he's like a stocky powerhouse type of guy, heavy leg kicks, overhands, physically strong in the clinch exchanges. So I'm going to say Al-Selwady is a stronger fighter who can neutralize submissions and just land the harder shots throughout the fight. So on to our next fight. We got Mario Pinto versus Felipe Franco. The pick has to be Mario Pinto. I think Mario Pinto is the clear side here. You know, he's proven at the UFC level. He's undefeated still. Massive height and reach advantage. He's on a 3-fight knockout streak. He's gone to a decision 3 times in his career. So we don't have to worry about, you know, serious gas tank issues And his opponent, Felipe, he looks like a decent, well-rounded fighter. Felipe has 6 wins by knockout and 4 wins by submission. His only loss came by submission, while Mario Pinto is more of a stand-up fighter. 7 wins by knockout, 1 submission, 3 decisions. And if you're just looking at the records, they may seem a little similar, but Felipe has not beaten a single opponent worth talking about. All the opponents he beats are 0-4 types of fighters. The last guy Felipe beat was someone who's 1-2 in their career. So apparently that's good enough to get into the UFC. And the only time Felipe fought someone with a decent record, he lost. So despite the records looking so similar, it's clear that the more proven fighter is Mario Pinto. Pinto just beat Jonathan Deniz, which is a decent win, and much more impressive than anyone Felipe has beat. Pinto, he's a highly skilled technical kickboxer, and if he does get you on the ground, he's got some smothering top pressure as well. On the feet, though, is where he does his best work. He's got a sharp jab, thudding leg kicks, hard left hooks, and looking to just break opponents down. He's got 100% takedown defense as well. He's patient in his striking and is also able to put up a ton of volume at the same time, and of course he has great finishing ability. His opponent, it's more less measured in his approach. Felipe, he swings hard, he has explosive power if he lands, and he'll likely want to turn this fight into a brawl because that's his best chance in my opinion. And if a takedown presents itself, he will go for it. Felipe will go for it, but he's usually looking to strike. Also, it'll be tough for him to get someone as big as Pinto down to the ground on the mat. So I think he'll be forced to strike on the feet here for the most part. And I do think both guys will be wanting to strike in this matchup. So this fight will take place mostly on the feet. And if that's the case, I see Pinto being the more measured fighter, managing his distance, being patient in picking his shots, and just outclassing Felipe, who just isn't on this level. Felipe Franco, he's more of an explosive brawler with knockout power, but he's largely untested against quality opponents. And when he did face the quality opponent, he did lose. So coming up against Mario Pinto, who's a technical kickboxer, patient shot selection, and he's got strong jabs and leg kicks with proven UFC wins, I'm just going to say Mario Pinto has the cleaner striking, and he's far more proven against legitimate competitions. So he's the safer side that I can trust here. Moving on to Mantas Kondratavicius versus Antonio Trocoli. I'm going Mantas Kondratavicius here. I just can't back Trocoli to win a fight. He's 6'5", but doesn't know how to use his height and reach to his advantage. Just because he's the bigger guy doesn't mean anything. Every guy he lost to has been either 6'2" or shorter, and he even lost to someone who was 5'9", and he's 0-3 in the UFC. So we know he isn't UFC level. He just lost. Well, not just. He lost to Shara Bullet, which is forgivable, but then gets submitted by Trayshawn Gore. That just shows the level he's at, And when he does win on the regional scene, it's nothing special. He doesn't look dominant. He has bad striking defense. His only real chance is to lock in a quick submission if it presents itself, But that's pretty much it. His opponent, Mantas Kondratavicius, obviously, he's still unproven in the UFC because he's making his debut, right? But he looks promising. He's on a 3-fight finishing streak, just secured a UFC contract with a first-round TKO victory on the Contender Series against someone who was undefeated, and that one loss in Mantas' career came from an undefeated great fighter on the regional scene, So it's not like he lost to a can. I feel like Mantas should be able to take care of someone who has multiple losses on the regional scene and someone who lost every single time they stepped into the UFC octagon. There's going to be an athleticism difference here. Mantas is very versatile in his strikes. He's got explosive power. He even has a flying knee knockout victory on his record. He's a highly skilled technical kickboxer, while his opponent Trocoli is more of an aggressive grappler, looking to close the distance, to initiate submission threats. But in my opinion, instead of closing the distance here, Trocoli needs to use his height and reach to manage distance to try and avoid the power shots coming back at him. But he's not good at doing that. He's way too hittable, even for someone of his giant size. The only path I see for him here is if he does close the distance, he'll just have to grind on Mantas against the fence and try to drag this fight to the ground. But while he's trying to close that distance, Mantas is going to meet him halfway and hunt for the knockout. So if this becomes a striking battle, Trocoli, like I said, is just way too hittable, and Mantas will be able to find counter shots to wobble Trocoli. And if Trocoli doesn't want this to be a striking match, he's gonna be in trouble trying to close the distance as well. So I feel like he's pretty much screwed either way. He's a tall grappler with poor striking defense, struggles to use his reach, and his submission hunting is really his only real path here. Whereas Mantas, an explosive striker, diverse offense, finishing momentum from the regional scene and the contender series, So Mantas, I feel like he'll be the faster, sharper striker, likely to catch Trocoli in the striking exchanges and put him out. So pick is Mantas Trocoli. Moving on to our next fight, where we got Louis Sutherland versus Brando Pericic. I'm picking Brando Pericic here. But this is a crazy matchup. Both guys are essentially the same type of fighter. Two massive guys with crazy power in their shots. Brando, he just made his UFC debut and got a first round knockout victory. I picked him to win in that fight. I thought he looked like a beast on the regional scene, and he got the job done in his UFC debut. And the way Brando fights is so chaotic. He throws nasty hooks, big overhands to close the distance, gets you in the clinch, throws nasty elbows, and even goes for takedowns as well in the clinch. He has really nice leg trips to get you down. He throws nice ground and pound when he is on top. He can transition from different positions really nicely. And it's such a fast and chaotic pace he brings in the first round. And on top of that, he's absolutely huge. And for a guy that big, he actually seems pretty versatile in his strikes. He likes to throw kicks as well, head kicks, leg kicks, which shows he's more athletic than he looks. And I mean, he puts up a frantic pace in round one. It's hard to keep up with him. All his victories come in the first round, and he's throwing everything at you, which just seems so overwhelming. And I do think he has a speed advantage here as well against Louis Sutherland. But from what I've seen in Louis Sutherland, he doesn't seem bad at all. He did lose his UFC debut against Walter Walker, but he actually broke Walker's leg. He shattered Walker's leg bone from a thudding leg kick. And I was considering to pick Sutherland to win in that fight. But essentially I did pick Walter Walker to win, and Walker did what Walker does. Even with a broken leg, he found the heel hook submission. But the reason I was considering Sutherland to win that fight, because he knows how to take control of the center of the octagon. He seems measured in his striking, never been finished by strikes or submission at the time, and he has only ever lost by a decision, And when Louis, he's throwing left and right hooks at you, from what I've seen on the regional scene, it's a scary sight, He holds a ton of power in his hooks. I can see Louis being measured in the first round of this fight, being patient enough to wait until the right shot selection presents itself, then applies pressure if he does smell any blood. But I don't think he will find the right shots to land on Brando if Brando isn't going to be patient in there and just immediately closing the distance right away with the faster striking, because Louis takes the control of the center of the octagon and then finds his shots, whereas Pericic is just all gas, no brakes with speed. And I feel like that patient and calculated style from Louis, it won't work on someone like Brando. I just feel like Louis is going to get overwhelmed and ran over by the bigger guy in the clinch, just closing the distance and being chaotic and throwing overwhelming shots that are faster than Louis' shots. I think Brando will be dictating the striking exchanges and the pace of the fight. He'll fight more on his terms, being the bigger, more chaotic guy against someone who also has a ton of crazy power, but not as chaotic. Brando should be coming forward more, and I think that will help him overwhelm Louis with pressure. Both guys, they are insanely powerful, but I'm just favoring the bigger guy who will come forward looking to land those shots over the guy who is a bit slower in the striking and can be too patient looking for the right shot. Because that's what Perich is. He's massive and chaotic. relentless first round pressure with hooks, clinch elbows, and trips, whereas Sutherland, measured power striker, dangerous hooks, but tends to wait for the openings and won't be as chaotic as Pericic. So I'm going to say that Brando is going to bring an overwhelming pace and aggression early in the first round that could just run Sutherland over, right? So moving on to our next fight, we got Nathaniel Wood versus Luzin Kieta. I'm picking Nathaniel Wood here. This is a fantastic matchup. It's a banger matchup. You know, I think I've seen enough of Nathaniel Wood to know he's a great fighter. You know, 10 wins in the UFC, only 3 losses, on the 3-fight winning streak right now. And dude, the last fight he had with Jose Delgado, I thought that was so impressive. The way he handled the adversity from Delgado, it was really impressive. I think Jose Delgado is a very dangerous fighter, and Nathaniel Wood got rocked and dropped badly in that fight, but stayed composed, came back in the second round, all bloodied up, and outstruck Delgado with technical boxing and range management. You know, it was a clean performance in the second and third round from Nathaniel Wood in his last fight versus Delgado, and I'll always be impressed by that performance. You know, I think now Nathaniel Wood, he's in the best shape of his career, but Luzin Kieta, you know, he is another dangerous striker he has to deal with now in this fight again. You know, this guy, Luzin Kieta, he isn't backing up or coming to point fight. This guy's coming to put the pressure on. He's fast and explosive. You know, he has quick combinations, a strong jab, and has shown great takedown defense as well. But keep in mind, in the striking, Nathaniel Wood usually has trouble with taller guys like Delgado and Andre Fili. Both of those guys were able to drop him in their fights. But despite being dropped by the taller guys, he still stays in the fight, stays composed, manages distance, and finds his rhythm, right? Times his shots, lands the jab, sticks and moves, counters nicely, and then wins those fights. And of course, Kieta, Luzin Kieta, he has looked good, but he hasn't been tested at the UFC level. It's one thing to look good outside the UFC, but we've seen many guys come in and with hype and not fulfill their expectations, right? And I'm not saying that will happen here. I do think Luzin Kieta is a great fighter, and he's coming into the UFC at a good time in his career. He's not coming in when he's washed out of his prime like Chandler or Pitbull. Also, Luzin is pretty much undefeated. You know, his only loss came from a fight he was winning. Then he randomly just broke his leg when he was landing ground and pound. So that was a weird one. But still, I do think it's safe to say Nathaniel Wood is the best fighter Luzin has ever fought. And at this time of his career, this is the best version of Nathaniel we've ever seen. You know, on a 3-fight win streak, he's looking better than ever. This could look like Nathaniel's last fight with Delgado. In the first round, it could be a feeling out process for Nathaniel with dangerous encounters. But in the second round, Nathaniel should make his adjustments and get his timing down and start outclassing Luzin on the feet. You know, this will for sure be the biggest test of Luzin's career. I don't even know if I'm saying his name right. You know, because it's definitely the best grappler he's ever faced in Wood. And despite him having great takedown defense, it's not yet been proven against a UFC level fighter. You know, I do think he can defend those takedowns, keep this fight on the feet, put the pressure on with his strikes. But this isn't anything new to Nathaniel. You know, Nathaniel might eat some shots early, but then his technical boxing and composure and jab should be able to take over this fight like how it usually does. You know, because he's an experienced technician. He's got great cardio, Wood. You know, he's composed under the pressure with strong boxing fundamentals. You know, and Luzin, he's an explosive pressure striker, fast combinations, and he has dangerous early offense as well. But that's nothing new for Nathaniel Wood, who's been tested against higher level competition. So I think Nathaniel Wood is going to be able to survive the early danger and outclass Luzin Kieta with adjustments and more volume throughout the fight. So pick is Nathaniel Wood here. Moving on to our next fight, we got Mason Jones and Axel Sola. I'm picking Mason Jones to win this fight. This is a great fight, though. We have undefeated Axel Souza versus an experienced UFC fighter, Mason Jones. I think the safer pick to side with is Mason Jones, who's been tested at a much higher level and has proven himself against much better competition. You know, obviously Axel Souza is undefeated, but he just made his debut against Reese McGee. Excuse me. And sure, it was on short notice, But still, it was competitive, and having a competitive fight with Reese McGee doesn't make me think you're going to stay undefeated for much longer. And now having to fight Mason Jones, who has an elite gas tank, doesn't shy away from adversity, he's tough as nails, consistent pressure with the wrestling, and has decent technical boxing. I think both guys here, they will be tough, but I think Mason Jones, obviously, he's more tested, and he has more ways to win with the wrestling pressure, throwing more volume, active with his kicks, and solid boxing, just doing more to win and not getting tired or slowing down either, while facing Sola, who's more of a technical, rangy striker. And Sola will go for takedowns if he needs to, but I don't think he'll be able to out wrestle someone at the level of Mason Jones. I just see Mason Jones setting a pace where Sola can't keep up with. The pace Mason Jones sets is a pace not many can keep up with. Mason should break him down with consistent combinations and pressure, mixing in the takedowns, working in the clinch, using heavy elbows and top control on the ground to dominate the rounds. And on top of that, he also has a solid chin, so he can eat a shot and continue using his elite cardio to outwork guys. So while Sola is primarily trying to strike here, I see him drowning from the clinch pressure, the wrestling pressure, the non-stop forward movement from Jones, the solid boxing and just overall activity level with the volume from Jones. Jones puts up that relentless pace. He's got the elite cardio, makes his boxing with clinch work and out of wrestling pressure. Sola, he is a rangy striker with decent grappling, but still relatively untested at a higher level. So I think the safer pick is Mason Jones. I'm gonna say that he breaks Sola down with pressure, wrestling, and just non-stop output. Just doing more to win. So, moving on to our next fight: Curtis Campbell versus Danny Silva. I'll pick Curtis Campbell to win here. Obviously Curtis, he's coming into this fight undefeated, 8-0, only 23 years old as well. I thought he might be too young here versus Danny Silva. But then after watching a couple of his fights, I thought I liked what I saw. He looks pretty hyper focused when he's fighting. He's super aware of everything coming back at him, and at the same time he's pressuring guys, with the striking, looking for the right shot, breaking guys down one strike at a time. He's fast twitch, finds the right shots, and stays defensively sound at the same time. And in his most recent performance in the Contender Series, he dragged his opponent down alongside the fence and just started ground and pounding him until the referee stepped in, and he just made it look easy in his Contender Series fight. Obviously, he hasn't been tested against UFC level competition, but Danny Silva hasn't looked anything special in the UFC. Danny Silva is 2-1 in the UFC, and his 2 wins. Yeah, Danny Silva is 2-1 in the UFC. His 2 wins are close split decision wins over low-level UFC competition. I think Curtis will perform in a way where it's convincing that he's winning. Like his performance should show he's clearly winning the fight. The way he moves, the way he picks his shots, the way he won't get hit too often, the way he puts the pressure on, it should look more convincing as a performance. I don't see him finishing Danny Silva, but the judges, I feel they won't have a hard time trying to tell who's winning the fight. That's what I'm trying to say. Danny Silva, I think he's just too basic in his striking. It's the jab and the 1-2s down the middle. It's nothing crazy. He tries to put out a lot of volume, but I don't see him landing often here. The way Curtis pressures guys, I see Danny Silva being on the back foot more often, while Curtis has the better defense as he's pressuring Danny Silva. I feel like Curtis should be more aware of the striking coming back at him, managing distance. Curtis should do a better job mixing things up with the kicks, have better timing in his shots, and more accuracy as well, more unpredictable with the strikes throughout the fight. And on top of that, he has great wrestling and he can take Silva down if he wants to, because Curtis, he has all the potential in the world right now. He's still 23. We don't know what he'll turn into. Whereas Danny Silva, we've seen what he is. He isn't the greatest. We got versus a young, undefeated prospect who's fast and he's a composed striker with solid wrestling. I'm gonna pick him over Silva, who has basic boxing combinations. Relies on volume, but just lacks a variety of strikes. Curtis Campbell, I'm going to say that he has a cleaner technique throughout the fight, better defense, and just more diverse offense, being more unpredictable as well. So, moving on from that fight, we got Christian Leroy Duncan versus Roman Dolidze. I can't understand why anyone would pick Roman Dolidze in this matchup with how Leroy Duncan has looked lately. I'm going Christian Leroy Duncan. CLD, he's on a 3 fight win streak. He's won 5 out of his last 6 fights, and that one loss is to Gregory Rodriguez by decision, which is aging really nicely. And it's specifically the last 2 fights of CLD that have impressed me the most. Two back-to-back brutal knockouts where he's looked like an absolute assassin. He's always been a sharp shooter, measured in his approach, but those last 2 performances just shot him into a whole other level in my eyes. And his most recent win was against Marco Tulio, and CLD was an underdog in that fight. And now fighting Roman Dolidze, who's 37 years old, out of his prime, who struggles when facing high-level contenders. This should be CLD all day. Clearly, the striking is going to favor CLD. He's much more creative and unorthodox on the feet and throws more volume of those unpredictable strikes as well. And the youth and athleticism, it will favor CLD as well. Roman Dolidze, he needs to try and find a way. He needs to try and find a way to get this fight on the ground. But CLD is just so buff and strong and has great balance. It's not easy to get a hold of someone like that or try to bully someone like that in the clinch or wrestling exchanges. On top of that, CLD is always moving, using his footwork, moving around the cage, never staying stationary. None of these guys have been knocked out, CLD or Roman Dolidze. But I have to think with where they both are in their stages of their careers, CLD carries the more power and has the better durability, being the younger guy with the momentum, fighting an aging veteran who's slowing down, who's always struggled against higher level competition. I see Dolidze just struggling to get this fight on the ground or finding success in the clinch. CLD's takedowns defense has looked pretty high level recently. In his last fight with Tulio, he was able to scramble and reverse Tulio's takedowns and land his own takedown and transition from positions pretty smoothly. And when Tulio tried initiating the clinch, CLD was able to reverse these positions and break away as well. I see CLD keeping the fight at range for the most part, using his long reach to land creative combinations and his diverse kicks and punches, pressuring Dolidze, waiting for him to overextend and catch him with a crazy counter like a spinning back fist or spinning elbow like he's been doing. The more damaging shots should clearly come from CLD, while Dolidze tries to clinch and stall against the fence, but CLD reversing position and going back to striking. That's pretty much how I see that fight going. Just reversing position and then going back to striking, with Duncan, Christian Leroy Duncan being the more creative striker, more athletic, dangerous spinning attacks and counter shots, while Dolidze being a veteran grappler, wanting the clinch and wanting to get this fight on the ground, but just slowing down throughout the fight and just slowing down in terms of his overall career, right? So I'm going to say CLD keeps the fight at range and lands the more damaging shots, and that would be the story of this fight. Moving on to Baraniewski versus Austen Lane. This matchup made me laugh when I first saw it. You're taking the chiniest guy in the UFC and putting him up against the actual Terminator. The way Iwo was fighting, the way Iwo was fighting in his last fight, the crazy brawling war he had with Ibo Aslan, he was coming forward, dropped his nuts, and started swinging hammers. Obviously, that's a dangerous way to fight, but it worked out for him. Ibo Aslan, he got knocked out before Iwo did. And if Iwo does the same thing here, and he decides to go chin for chin against Austen Lane, I have no doubt Lane is getting put to sleep, right? If Iwo comes out here rushing forward like the way he did in his last fight, without a care in the world, I don't even think he'll get dropped in this fight. He'll just find the right button and put Austen Lane to sleep, But I feel like the last fight of Iwo Baraniewski, that war that he had, yeah, it was crazy and exciting, but that's not really the type of fighter he is, In the fight he had before that, he had a much cleaner performance. He was an underdog in the Contender Series, and it was just a clean slip right hand that got the job done 20 seconds into his fight. He hunted him down for as long as the fight lasted, and as soon as his opponent threw a punch, instantly slipped and countered and finished the job. That hunter-like fighting style while staying composed is what you like to see in a fighter, in a prospect. But now we know if things get shaky and he has to bite down on the mouthpiece, he's not afraid of some adversity. He'll eat some punches, get back up, keep throwing hammers, which is great to see as well. But I do think this performance here versus Austen Lane will be much cleaner than his last fight, considering Austen Lane gets knocked out so easily, right? Austen Lane is 1-4 in his last 5 fights. He's been finished in all his losses. I just can't get behind him to win here. Lane, he actually is primarily a striker. So if he tries to test his durability here against Evo, he's 100% losing that fight. He should for sure just try to keep this fight at range, use his jab, and then time a takedown, and use his massive size to gather up some ground and control. But the thing is, Iwo is not someone that's going to get out wrestled so easily. Iwo has a background in judo. He's got high level wrestling, and he has all finishes in his wins. And he's obviously the harder hitter in between these two. So I see Iwo landing the right shot, keeping this fight on the feet, using his judo background if he has to, and then just knocking Lane out. Because Iwo, he's got so many ways, more ways to win here. He's a heavy-handed brawler with knockout power and a strong grappling base here. Whereas Lane, he's a big, tall striker, but extremely chinny and vulnerable and when it comes to firefights. So my pick is Iwo Baraniewski. I think he's going to land a cleaner bomb in this matchup, likely in the first exchange, right? So we'll see what happens. Pick is Iwo for sure, though. Moving on to Michael Venom Page versus Sam Patterson. The pick here is Michael Venom Page. But I will say, Sam Patterson is an absolute dog. And I'm not surprised at all by the success he's had in the UFC, But in my opinion, MVP is just on a whole nother level of striking. Usually I'm favoring the younger guys to win, but not this time. MVP is just too clean on the feet. I picked him to win his last fight versus Jared Cannonier, and I even picked MVP to win when he was an underdog against Shower Bullet. That style that he fights with is just so hard to deal with, especially if his opponent is willing to strike with him. We saw MVP turn Ian Gary into a wrestler. That's how high level MVP striking is. Even at this age, at 38 years old, he still looks vintage, dominating Jared Cannonier in his last fight, obviously dominating Shower Bullet before that as well. And this is a big deal for Sam Patterson. This is a huge opportunity for Patterson to really stamp his name and get some bigger matchups, because he's super talented, but not many people know him the same way they know MVP, who is much more popular. But still, though, I don't think he's ready for someone like MVP. Patterson, he is on a 4-fight finishing streak, though, all in the first round as well. He hasn't beaten anyone with a big name, but still, 4-fight finishing streak in the first round in the UFC is still impressive, But when it comes to striking in this matchup, when it comes to striking in general, I don't see anyone beating MVP. And I actually mean that. I actually think he's the best striker in any division right now. And I thought that before he fought Shara Bullet. Like, when it comes to purely striking, I think he's the best. But when it comes to MMA, mixing it all up, maybe he's not the best, right? So I don't think Patterson has a chance on the feet. Patterson is a rangy fighter on the feet that likes to use counters to land on opponents, but he is pretty hittable, and I can see MVP landing shots on him, evading any counters Patterson tries to throw back. And Patterson, he's going to realize that the striking won't favor him here. And that's when he'll turn to his wrestling, But Patterson's struggling. With Patterson struggling with the range control and the striking itself, it'll be tough for him to set up any takedowns. And even if he does manage to take him down, he would have already ate enough shots from MVP to lose the round, MVP is one of those guys who enters an elite level striking flow state. And as soon as the fight starts, as soon as the fight starts, he's moving to his own rhythm, striking whenever he wants to, plays these mental games. So you think you know what he's going to do, and then he just randomly strikes you. And he's good at staying on the outside, picking you apart, hands low with great footwork, strikes you like a cobra, and he's super unpredictable. He'll feint a punch, but then throw a flying knee. So on the feet, this should be one-way traffic. MVP's footwork and timing is better, more accurate in his shots, more faster. So I think Patterson is in for a long night if he gives MVP a striking match, right? MVP's going to win a striking match. Patterson will then resort to the wrestling, but I feel MVP will be landing enough shots on Patterson throughout the fight that even if Patterson gets him down, it won't be enough to win the rounds because MVP would have landed enough damaging shots on Patterson throughout the fight, enough so that he wins the rounds. Because I really think Michael Venom Page, he is an elite striker. Unpredictable timing, incredible distance control, and his counter ability is just high level as well. Whereas Patterson, he's a finishing threat with reach and grappling, but he's hittable in the striking exchanges. And the guys that he's beating, they're nowhere near MVP. So I'm gonna say that MVP just has a striking masterclass here, and that range control should be enough to help him win this fight and not get taken down as often. Moving on to Luke Riley versus Michael Aswell. The pick is Luke Riley. This kind of seems like Luke Riley, like a setup for him to win in London in front of his hometown crowd. When I first saw Michael Aswell's name in this matchup, I was like, who is he again? Oh yeah, isn't he the punching bag that fought Balaji Oki? So that just goes to show what my instincts were of him, what I thought about him. In his last matchup, Aswell, he actually won via first round TKO, but that win didn't really count because his opponent clearly had a broken hand walking into the ceremonial weigh-ins with a hand the size of a balloon. My foot was a balloon, so his opponent was severely compromised in that fight. But even before the injury was made public, I was still picking Aswell to win that fight because he's still a tough fighter, and his opponent is clearly he's clearly wasn't UFC level. So Aswell, he'll throw down and get gritty if he has to, but other than that, he's really known for his durability, getting hit often, and that's not something you want to be known for, especially not against someone like Luke Riley, who's looking to knock your head off. Aswell, he has struggled versus decent fighters. He lost to Yadir Del Valle on the regional scene, lost to Bogdan Grad on the Contender Series, and most recently lost to Balaji Oki. And that Balaji Oki fight loss, it's not aging really well, with how he just lost. He just lost two times in a row, Oki. That's kind of crazy because I thought Oki would be pretty decent. But anyways, the guys that Aswell is losing to, Yadir Del Valle, Bogdan Grad, Balaji Oki, these aren't high-level contenders. They're just decent fighters, right? And I know for sure Luke Riley is at least decent when it comes to comparing him to Aswell, who I wouldn't even consider decent. I wouldn't consider Aswell decent. Riley is still unproven at the UFC level, but Aswell has proven to not be UFC level, So I do think he's good enough to beat Aswell. Riley is on a 3-fight knockout streak right now, obviously still undefeated, and he's getting better. He just knocked out Bogdan Grad, and like I said earlier, Bogdan Grad beat Aswell. But of course, MMA math doesn't always work, but MMA math usually doesn't work at a higher level. These guys are still new in their UFC careers, and I feel the way Riley beat Bogdan Grad, it was just really impressive. And I mean, landing a monstrous right hand shot like that against Bogdan Grad for Luke Riley, then you see Aswell getting outworked by Bogdan Grad. I think it's safe to assume MMA math should work here. Michael Aswell, I feel like he's going to come in here, bite down on the mouthpiece, come forward, throw a ton of pressure, but he's going to be way too hittable. And if you're hittable against an aggressive, lethal Muay Thai striker like Luke Riley, you're going to get knocked out, And if Aswell, he's never been knocked out. So Riley has the potential to be the first person to knock him out. And Aswell is pretty durable. So if he doesn't get knocked out, he should just get outstruck by Luke Riley the whole time. Like, think about it. Who do you think this co-main event spot is for in London? The below average UFC fighter or the rising British star, right? So if it wasn't for Luke Riley, Aswell would never find himself on a co-main event. I think the more accurate volume should come from Luke Riley here. The harder punches favor Riley, and the counter striking will favor Riley as well. As well, he's gonna eat a ton of punches, but if he's getting countered every time he tries to land some of his own shots, none of his durability is gonna matter because he just won't be in the fight at all. He's gonna be eating shots, and then as soon as he tries to hit back, he's getting countered. This should be one-way traffic from Riley, an aggressive Muay Thai striker with knockout power, and he's got fast counters as well. Whereas Aswell, he's known for being durable, a pressure fighter, and extremely hittable against better competition. So I'm going to say that Luke Riley just likely lands the harder shots and overwhelms Aswell in this fight. Moving on to the main event of the evening, Lerone Murphy versus Movsar Evloev. I'm going Lerone Murphy. This is such a crazy matchup. I'm going to say Lerone Murphy comes through in his hometown, lands the cleaner shots, stuffs the takedowns, and saves this division from a wrestling heavy #1 contender. Lerone, obviously he's going to be the better striker here. He's much more precise in his shots. He's throwing higher volume. He has high level takedown defense as well. Also, I just want to say I picked Lerone Murphy to beat Aaron Pico when Murphy was an underdog. I made him underdog of the week because still to this day I can't understand why Murphy was an underdog in that fight. I was looking at my notes from the Lerone Murphy versus Aaron Pico fight, and I saw that I wrote down word for word, I think Pico's aggressive style and his boxing can cost him against someone like Murphy, who can counter those shots and exploit those potential openings in the striking exchanges. Then I said Pico is going to look to pressure Murphy, but again, I just think Murphy's footwork and counter shots will be too good for Pico. And that's exactly what happened. But yeah, Murphy, he's high level. He throws a solid amount of volume, accurate with his strikes, thrives while fighting off the back foot, and I do think he can land enough damaging shots before having to start defending takedowns. So we know he has excellent striking, excellent footwork, has cardio to fight all night long. I think we're going to see him stay on the outside for the majority of the fight, land nice leg kicks, move around, outstrike Movsar, and he won't let Movsar get too comfortable in the wrestling. I think Lerone is athletic enough to sprawl and defend takedowns, land the heavier shots on the feet, and keep moving and frustrating Movsar. I don't think Lerone has to worry about the striking pressure here. He'll clearly be the better striker, the more calm, precise, and accurate striker. And even if Movsar lands anything crazy on the feet, Lerone is durable and has dealt with strikers pressuring him his whole career, right? And I don't think it's going to be easy to control Lerone Murphy, and keep him on the ground for the majority of the fight. Lerone Murphy fought someone named Makwan Amirkhani, and Lerone, he did get held down for the whole first round. But then Murphy came out in the second round determined to not get taken down. He adapted really well, looked super locked in, timed the knee perfectly, as Makwan came in and just knocked him out cold, right? And we've seen guys take down Murphy, but he always manages to adapt to the fight or get back up to his feet and then win the fight, So that makes me even more confident in him, He's a precise striker with excellent footwork and a strong takedown defense, and he knows how to adjust well. Whereas Movsar, he does have that elite wrestling pedigree, relentless pressure, and just a grinding control style. But I think the cleaner striking should come from Lerone Murphy, and his defensive wrestling could edge a decision here. So the more damaging shots, I feel, should come from Murphy, and that should be the story of this fight. We've seen Movsar all bruised up and bloodied up, and I feel like Lerone has potential to do that and not get held down for the majority of the fight, right? So that does conclude this week's UFC card predictions for Murphy versus Emmett. Hope you guys enjoyed. Till next time.